What's up, guys? So I posted a thread about variables that hold people back in terms of their progression. The thread was posted, let's see, so it was yesterday, which would have been October 1st. Basically, I just asked, what is one variable you think slows your progression or kind of limits your success? Something that you'd like to work on? I got all kinds of different questions. Or topics, I guess. There was a lot of overlap between the topics, so I can kind of cluster in a lot of things into maybe a few videos. I know in the post I said I would just pick one, but there was a lot, so I'm kind of a sucker and I'll probably talk about pretty much all of them. First one I'm going to go over is sleep. There was a lot of sleep questions, so I'll just cover sleep in general and why that is, why that might be impeding your progression, what you can do about it, and probably a lot of things that you didn't consider when it comes to sleep. So I actually made some notes. I normally don't make notes. I normally just fire right off the hip, but sleep is really, really vast. There's so many things that go into sleep. I'm not even going to brush the surface of all of them in terms of all the little intricacies, but I'm going to cover all the major ones at least, and probably the most common ones. And then you might hear some things throughout this that kind of spark some interest, and you can, jump on and do a little bit of your own research and some things that might be specific to you. So first off, with sleep, we run on a 24-hour clock, so you've heard the term circadian rhythm. We do run on our body likes to run on a pretty strict circadian clock. So with that said, sleep and wake times is probably one of my biggies, and I think a lot of people do an okay job of that, but I still think some people kind of miss the boat on that one. Sleeping or going to bed and waking up at close to the same time every day, or as close as possible, that's really important. It's going to maximize our sleep-wake cycle. Hormonally, our adrenal glands and our nervous system, our neurotransmitters, everything is going to run and function on that cycle optimally, and you're going to feel tired at about the same time. You're going to feel alert at about the same time. It might not be perfect. There's days that you might sleep in a little bit, days you have to get up a little bit earlier and go to work and all this, but for the most part, you're going to notice more success in terms of your sleep if you can run on that cycle. And with that, just I don't feel like I have to touch on this a lot because I think it's obvious, but sleep deprivation in general, just not getting enough sleep. I've posted a bunch of studies on this and talked about how even one night of sleep deprivation can cause things like insulin resistance, acutely, not permanently, but cause short-term insulin resistance, interruptions in hunger patterns as far as like your ghrelin hormone, can cause just lack of, obviously lack of energy, and cause anxiety. That's a whole host of things that it can cause in the short term. And some people, I think, get under the impression that if they just do more and sleep less, they're going to be more productive. And I personally, I don't find that to be true at all. I have a schedule that's really demanding, pretty much get up from the time I get up to the time I go to bed. But at the same time, I know personally, if I sleep less, I'm not going to get anything else done. I'm going to have a really hard time concentrating, and, I'm not going to be as productive. So the whole idea of team no sleep, I think it's just a ridiculous idea. You're not going to get anything else done. Probably going to get about the same done, maybe less, and you're going to feel like crap at the same time. There could be times where there's deadlines and things, and you have to work through it, but it just, as a whole, that whole idea is ridiculous. It's not going to help you. And while we're on sleep-wake cycles, I think it's probably important to talk about, shift work. That's a big one. You can't always help it. You have to do your job. You might not really have an option. If you do have an option, don't do the shift work. There are some ways that you can strategically use things like low doses of stimulants and supplementing melatonin to kind of help offset these sleep-wake cycle disturbances and circadian disturbances. Same way someone might use melatonin for jet lag, for example, or resetting time zones. You can punch that into Google, really easy to find. There's a bunch of articles on it, so you guys can check that out if it's something you're interested in. With circadian rhythm in general, I think there's some other things to consider too. Like anything, it's really going to be dictated by your hypothalamus. So, I mean, if there's other things going on in your life and your hormonal axis or something that might disrupt your hypothalamus function, then that could be, disrupting sleep as kind of a secondary effect. So not directly, but sometimes I think it's important to kind of trace the steps back a little bit, and you might see or catch something in there that you didn't originally. So hypothalamus, definitely important, making sure that the function there is, tip-top shape, as well as, there's a lot of other hormonal things going on here too, and I'll touch on a little bit of that as well. So we'll just touch on that now since we're kind of on the topic, but just some, looking at the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system especially, so your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. We are, I think just as a society, we're in a pretty sympathetically driven state. A lot of people are, and some people naturally are just a little bit more than others simply because they are a little bit anxious, or they have a really demanding job, or they're just kind of on edge all the time because, whatever. Maybe they use too many stimulants. Who knows? Could be a lot of things. So not being too sympathetically driven, especially at the wrong times. We talk about things like adrenal dysfunction, and that could obviously interrupt your sleep-wake cycle. Being constantly sympathetically driven is not going to help adrenal function at all. You're going to be constantly releasing stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. That's going to tax your adrenal glands. Your hypothalamus is not going to be happy either. So, balancing that sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. You obviously want to be a lot less sympathetically driven at night and activate that parasympathetic nervous system. Anything that requires being calm. Digestion's another one. We don't want to be in panic and trying to digest food. So again, at night especially, PNS activation is really important. So if you have to do meditation, yoga, soft belly breathing, whatever you need to do to kind of increase parasympathetic nervous system function, then that could be helpful. And there's some supplements and stuff that could help with that as well. Just stress in general, any kind of stress is going to be, any kind of systemic stress over the long run is going to probably cause some kind of issue in terms of just too much sympathetic drive. Inflammation can disrupt your sleep cycle. So just stress in general is not going to help sleep, because anything, our body runs in so many feedback loops in terms of different body systems that, systemic stress and inflammation is really going to disrupt a lot of things. I've seen it disrupt anything. It could disrupt a number of things. So, again, stress. If you're stressed, even if you don't necessarily feel stressed right before bed, but you're just naturally really stressed all the time, again, you're going back to that sympathetic nervous system drive constantly, and that is going to interrupt your sleep-wake cycle because your neurotransmitters and hormones are not going to function properly because they have been disrupted during the day. So food could go into that as well. Not eating a high inflammatory diet. Naturally, we're going to have some inflammation from weight training and things like that. That's okay. It's kind of localized to the muscles, hopefully where we want it to be, so the muscle grows. But at the same time, good food selection, not choosing foods that are going to be highly inflammatory. I think that people do miss the boat on this. You'd be surprised. I think people miss the boat on this kind of more often than they should. Maybe when it comes to things like fat intake, not choosing the right fats in the diet, or an abundance of like abundance of carbohydrates when their body can't process it. So maybe they have insulin resistance or something, and that is going to cause inflammation. So, through nutrition, trying to keep inflammation down. Obviously, GI function's better too. That's helpful, digestion and what have you. So, lowering inflammation through food is going to help with that systemic stress. Some secondary things too. Looking at I'll go into supplements some, but actually we'll go into kind of environmental stuff first. I think this is probably one of the most important things besides maybe the first things I mentioned. So in terms of environment, setting up your environment is crucial. I think that I've hammered this home, and there's some other smart guys out there that are putting out the good word, and people are definitely figuring it out. Stuff like wearing your blue light blockers. Okay, so in terms of environment, first off, we could just look at your actual bedroom. I'm a firm believer that bedroom, it's really not something that you're doing much in other than being in there at night. I don't think there should be a whole lot going on in there besides a bed, and not even really a fan of having a TV in there. You can. I'm not anyone's parent if you want to put a TV in there. But watching TV before bed all of the time, laying in bed might not be the best thing in the world. So, using your bedroom for what it's supposed to be used for, that's going to be crucial. So with that, a little more setup stuff, blackout curtains, that's really helpful. As dark as you can make it is going to be better. That circadian rhythm and sleep-wake cycle and the hormones that are involved in that, melatonin, for example, respond to dark and light. So part of the reason that blue light is an issue is because it does disrupt melatonin production. So that's one of the things that it does. That's one of the reasons that it, impedes sleep quality. So if we can keep it darker, that's going to be better. So anyone nobody on here, maybe there might be a couple of you on here that have been in my house at night, but it's like dark as hell in here all the time at night. Between a couple hours before bed, I'll have like a couple lights on. Everyone's got blue light glasses on, and it's really dark. And we sit in the dark a lot. It makes you tired though too. And that's kind of the point. Because your body is responding to that darkness. There's a reason that you're getting tired. So that's, obviously the point. Let's see what else we have here. In the bedroom, comfort as well. Having good bedding, having good room, climate control. If you need a little white noise in there, you can do that. Sound. Yeah, so sound. I wrote sound on here. I personally like earplugs. I don't know. Wasn't real keen on them at first just because I thought that my mind would race and that would just make it worse. However, I started using them and I really, really like them, and I haven't had any issues with them, and I really prefer not to sleep without them ever. I have a little travel, just a little baggie that I throw in my bag when we go to shows or travel for clients or whatever. Always take it with me. So yeah, earplugs are really nice. If you want to have if you want to wear an eye cover, extra, blocking the light out, that's fine. Blackout curtains, like I said, good bedding, good temperature, and so on and so forth. So with that also would be sleep apnea. So wanted to mention that on here. With the sleep apnea, I think, again, it's another thing a lot of people are getting aware of. And inherently with bigger people, we're a little more prone to it. More muscular people are going to be a little more prone to it. Heavier people are going to be a little more prone to it. So if you suspect that you have it, if you're a really heavy snorer, anything like that, maybe your spouse or partner says that you stop breathing a lot, you probably want to get that checked out. That will definitely impact quality of sleep. You definitely want to, take care of it. So that's another one. with supplementation, I know this is one everyone always wants to talk about. It's actually the first thing I get asked about is I don't sleep that good, or I can't fall asleep, or I can't stay asleep, or whatever it might be. What can I take? Well, first off, if you can circle back and get rid of all the potential environmental factors that are going to interrupt it, that's a good start. Probably going to sleep better right there. I would be shocked if you didn't. I mean, I would be shocked. But with that said, there are things in terms of supplements, medications, and so on that will interrupt or improve sleep. So a big one is there's a whole bunch of prescription medications that impact sleep, whether it's sleep quality, whether or REM sleep, or they impact like your neurotransmitters in some way or your hormones in some way. Couldn't even begin to go over them all. Personally, I don't even know all of the sleep medications because there's always new ones. I know a good handful of them, but I'm sure there's a lot that I don't know of. So if you are using some kind of sleep medication, I would be very leery of that, and I would probably research how it actually works from a mechanistic standpoint. There's the argument, well, I don't sleep at all without it. Maybe it's better to sleep some than not at all. But at the same time, I had made a post recently about some studies that were showing just the interruptions in REM sleep and like slow wave sleep that these medications were causing people. And then there's over the counter stuff that does the same thing. I mean, a big one is not necessarily over the counter. It is some places. Bunch of people, started commenting on marijuana on there. I made a couple comments on it. I didn't want to get flamed for it, but it is what it is. You can look up some research that talks about THC, and it does have some stimulatory effects and some depressive effects. So my point on this is that with some of these medications, with THC, for example, a lot of these things do help you fall asleep for a number of reasons. They might have some kind of neurotransmitter, impact. Let's say like a benzo, for example, acts on GABA. All right. Well, you have a lot of anxiety. Yeah, it's going to make you fall asleep because it gets rid of the anxiety temporarily. But that doesn't mean that it's improving your quality of sleep. It's probably not. It's probably worsening the quality of sleep and creating further sleep debt. So instead of taking the medication, circle back, fix the environmental things. If those are fixed and it's just a matter of you're depressed or you have anxiety or something, maybe address that issue at its core. Address that issue at its core rather than masking it with a medication. It's not to say that a medication couldn't serve as like a bridge while you address the issue to give you some temporary relief if things are really bad. Obviously it's something you'd have to discuss with your doctor or a psychiatrist or something, not me. I'm not prescribing things, of course. So with that, like I said, look at them from a mechanistic standpoint. A lot of the medications, though they do help you fall asleep because they band-aid some kind of underlying issue, they do not fix the underlying issue, and many of them interrupt your REM sleep. They throw off sleep EEG if you were to test that, and it's not going to improve your sleep. You'll end up with further sleep debt in the long run. So keep that in mind. I think it's also important to think about things like stimulants. People know that, well, you're not going to sleep very good with caffeine, and there's people like, well, I fall asleep, I can take caffeine and fall asleep. Okay, well, you're still not going to have as restful sleep as you would without it in your system. That's not the point. Just because you can fall asleep, it's going to be a similar idea as the medications. It's not just because you're falling asleep doesn't necessarily mean that the sleep is as quality as it should be. So if you're going to use stimulants, which is fine, they serve as ergogenic aids. They help productivity during the day, all that stuff. Not denying it. think it's perfectly fine to use. I think it's a good idea to know the half-life and the active life of the stimulants. Not all of them are the same. Most people are probably just using caffeine. Most people throw around like that 5 to 6 hour number. Well, that's really more like the half-life. The active life is much, much longer. So again, just because you're falling asleep doesn't mean you don't still have caffeine in your system, and maybe a fair amount, and it's interrupting your sleep quality. You're just not noticing it necessarily because you are asleep. You're just not sleeping very deeply. So again, clearance times on those medications, I think, is a good thing to look at. Because I made another good note here. So yeah, too, with caffeine, I don't think a lot of people realize what caffeine, part of the reason caffeine keeps you awake is because it suppresses adenosine, which adenosine accumulates in your body during the day as part of, getting ready to sleep. So of course that's going to keep you awake. You're suppressing the adenosine. So, and it's obviously a central nervous system stimulant as well. When to use supplements, there are times where it's fine to use supplements. I think that, and somebody may correct me on this, but some people just naturally have some kind of neurotransmitter imbalance somewhere. You may have everything else nailed. You might have addressed your psychological issue at the core. You might have addressed everything at the core. You might still need some kind of medication here and there. You might need to boost your GABA one night. You might need to boost your serotonin one night. You might need to take some melatonin. You might need these things. Know how to use them without using them constantly, without constantly bombarding yourself and dumping tons of serotonin, getting something like serotonin syndrome, without constantly, increasing your dopamine and your GABA levels and constantly hammering yourself with melatonin. Without doing these things constantly, I think you can strategically use these supplements as on an as needed basis. Maybe you have those days where your sleep-wake cycle is off a little bit because of your work. Well, utilize the supplements strategically in that way to keep things as balanced as you can. And that's on the days that you don't need it, don't use them. Don't use them as a crutch. They might make you feel like you're addicted to them, like you have to have them. So be careful of that. That's pretty much it, guys. I covered most of the major, the heavy hitters here. If anyone has any extra questions about some specifics, then they can let me know. Again, there are, like I said, a lot of people, I think they should go back through medications that they take and look at things from a mechanistic standpoint, try to figure out if that's impacting them. And again, circle back to the root of all your issues. I mentioned that in a few different instances on here, and that is probably one of the biggest things that's missed once all the environmental factors are taken into account. So that's it for this one, guys. I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question specifically. I'm trying to make this as broad as possible just because there was so many sleep questions. On the next one, probably going to talk about just adherence and consistency. And there was some good questions on consistency throughout the day and adherence issues because of people's work schedule, because of things like appetite. There was a number of questions. So I'll probably go into that next, talk about meal frequency and meal planning and adherence and all that good stuff. So that'll be next time, and appreciate you guys watching. We'll see you next time.